that time, the US was extremely influential and looked down on the Vietnamese army because they understood that in 1965, the Soviet Union had to start sponsoring weapons for them. They thought it would take at least a year for people who had never seen a radio before to skillfully use missiles. However, unexpectedly, in just 3 months, our troops were already shooting effectively. That's why American planes in 1965 to 1966 were used intensively. According to documents released by the US, by the end of 1965, 61 US pilots had been captured. In 1966, on average, every 10 days, 8 US planes were shot down and 86 more US pilots were registered as temporary residents in Hỏa Lò prison. Back then, there were many tragic stories about the pilots who ended up in Hỏa Lò. First, we must mention Richard Pop Kearn, a man with the ability to fly a plane straight into the most classic prison in America. During World War II, on his first time flying a bomber over Germany, he was shot down and had to spend 9 months in a German prison. He learned from experience, but not deeply enough. When he came to Vietnam and flew for a few hours under his superior's orders, he was once again called down to earth and had to stay at Hỏa Lò prison for 10 years. Richard Pop Kearn's story was already tragic, but it was nothing compared to Robinson Risner's story. Risner was an American hero in the American War, with 109 successful missions and 3,000 combat flight hours, a record that not every professional pilot could achieve. Despite these achievements, when he came to Vietnam, he was shot down on his 5th mission. If things had stopped there, it wouldn't have been worth mentioning. However, the day after his plane caught fire, he flew out to the sea and was rescued by the US Naval Rescue Team. Major American newspapers, like the New York Times, printed Colonel Robinson Risner's photo on their front pages and praised him as a hero, a legend of the US Air Force. But shortly after making headlines, on September 16, 1965, the legend praised by Americans was shot down in Thanh Hóa and transferred to Hỏa Lò prison for 7.5 years. Interestingly, this time the American media kept quiet and didn't say anything more about their legend. At that time, too many US pilots were captured in Vietnam. Moreover, US pilots were all high-value assets, creating a lot of pressure at the Paris negotiation table. So the US had to find every way to rescue them. We already know very well from previous episodes how intelligence gathered information to identify where the prisoners were. However, not everyone may know how soldiers were recruited and trained to prepare for the raid. Back then, the US recruited all soldiers on a voluntary basis. No one could know where they would go, what they would do, and for what purpose. They only knew that this raid would be extremely difficult. After having a preliminary list, the commanders would go through the list person by person. Anyone who had just gotten married or whose wife was pregnant was immediately crossed off the list. They simply didn't want any of the soldiers dreaming of home. Only those who could devote 200% of their energy to training were eligible to be chosen. After this selection round, US soldiers had to pass the final round, which was the interview round. This interview round essentially had no effect on the selection process, but it was a method of deceiving their own soldiers so that even they who were involved could not know that they were being trained to prepare for a raid in Vietnam. Some were asked, how long can you walk in the desert without drinking water? Or questions like, does your skin burn easily in the sun? Can you tolerate being locked in a crowded room full of people who like to eat raw garlic, but are afraid of water and don't dare to bath? After these interviews, the commanders knew that their soldiers would gather again and discuss the questions that had been asked to connect with each other and find solutions for their upcoming raids.